When you think of the phrase, think outside of the box, if you apply that to my guest, who I'm going to have on today, Joergen Rasmussen, that is an understatement. I don't think Joergen is capable of thinking inside of any box. And for the most part, I would say that that's a good thing. Sometimes maybe not. And that's what we're going to get into, I think, today. So welcome, Joergen.
Thank you, Damon. I'll take it as a compliment, as it does seem to kind of fit my self-concept. So,
All right.
confirmation bias going there.
Yeah, so before we jump into this, I do want to say a few things. First of all, Joergen has some very interesting things to teach, and he will be teaching for my membership groups. If you're in any one of my membership groups, you will get this for free. It's a bonus workshop. And if you're not in one of my membership groups, well, why not? What's going on there? Okay, so the least expensive one is the Ultimate Practitioner Training. It is a full-on NLP practitioner training. I spared nothing in putting that together. You can sign up for it right now. If you do, you will be able to see Joergen's workshop next week, and you will get any past workshops that we've done, both ones that I've taught and ones with other teachers. You get access to it all. So make sure you sign up for that. You'll see that in the description below this video. You will also see further contact information if you want to seek Joergen's. He has a YouTube channel as well. That's all in there in the description. Now, real quick, how I met Joergen was I was doing NLP trainings as a student, and I started to hear about this guy, this crazy guy who did NLP, who did hypnosis in Norway and was doing some really crazy things, some really dark things. And I was like, wow, this sounds terrible. I wouldn't want to be near that guy. And then years later, I'm in London and I'm giving I have a speech to give, or a presentation to give, and I see who's on the roster, and I see Joergen Rasmussen, and I was like, wait a minute, this guy can actually step out into the sunlight without turning into dust? They actually let this guy travel to different countries and cross borders? I gotta go check this out. And so my wife and I went and checked out his talk, and I gotta say, it was the best presentation of the entire conference. And I had to update my inaccurate concept of who you were when I saw that. And right after the talk, I don't know if you remember this, but I walked right up to you and I introduced myself and I said, that was a great talk and I want to shoot a YouTube video with you.
I do.
And and we did that video. I went to Norway and I pulled out my old film school skills, and we turned it into what kind of looks like a horror movie in the beginning. We had a lot of fun with it. But you get to know Joergen a lot better, and even on a personal level. And you have a beautiful family, by the way, and I hope they're doing well. Also, we need to get back over to Norway and visit you and them. So that's my story with Joergen. Now, how this kind of came about was Joergen did a video on the self-concept model, the model that I teach, the model that my mentor, Steve Andreas, taught me, and the one that I focus on the most, and that Steve actually endorsed me, the only person ever endorsed to carry it on and teach it. So you went and kicked that hornet's nest. What compelled you to do that?
Just had to.
So
Just thank you, right?
what made you decide to do that? Let's start there.
I've had a few people actually, 4 or 5, ask me, what are your views on the self-concept model? Will you make a video about it? And I do from time to time make these videos where I offer critiques of various change work frameworks and schools of psychotherapy and psychology. And yeah, that's one of those things I tend to do. And I tend to offer, what I perceive to be strengths and weaknesses in those particular approaches.
Okay, and did you, when you were making the video, know that we were going to end up here doing this?
I had a hunch.
Yeah, I had a feeling, because you sent me the video and you say, hey, I mentioned you in this video, and I watch it and I'm like, oh man. And then I saw the comments below it, and people were like, Damon, are you just gonna, let him do that? And I said, no, I already reached out to him. We're gonna go and we're gonna do this debate. We're gonna talk
Even
about
though, even though I would have still made it if I didn't know you. So
it. Okay, fair
it's,
enough.
yeah.
Fair enough. So a few things that I wanted to mention that I appreciated about the video, to start there. Mentioning Steve Andreas's generosity, like that was great, and he was very much that. He valued kindness very highly, and he really walked that talk. So thank you for putting that out there. Thank you for showing gratitude for that, because that was another important value of Steve's. And if you showed gratitude toward him helping you out, he would just give you so much of his time in doing that. So I appreciate that. What I think you got right, and this is the thing, this is the part when I guess we'll get to this, because you have a really good grasp of this model. You have a really good grasp of it. So I'm a little surprised by some of the things that you said that I believe are inaccurate and which we're going to get into. And so I want to point out some of these things because I think a lot of people read the book, they don't really do the exercises. And that's another question I have for you. Did you actually like do the exercises as you were going through it, or did you just read through it?
I did the exercises.
Okay, and that was the sense that I got, because it's really hard to grasp all of these things without doing the exercises. I know a lot of people try to read the book and they go, I don't get it. And I say, well, did you actually do the exercises? And they say, no. And I was like, well, that's why you don't get it. It's very experiential. You really don't grasp it otherwise. So that is the sense that I got from you.
Both with myself and also with quite a few clients at the
Okay,
time.
okay, good. So you tested it out. All right.
Yeah.
You got that values are generalizations about experiences that are important to you. Self-esteem is created by aligning with those values. Like that's such a key learning that a lot of people miss. The elements of a healthy self-concept that you brought out, durable, unconscious, connecting, accurate, receptive to feedback, all really good. Ultimately, our concepts of ourselves and others, in addition to the above that I just mentioned, the healthy elements, should be useful. Otherwise, like, what's the point? That's the whole point of the self-concept model, is that it's useful. And that was really the basis of everything Steve did. That's the standard in which he measured anything, is it useful? He didn't really care really about the theoretical parts of it. Okay, so what I think you get wrong. What you called the main weakness of the self-concept, that I was like, I don't understand how you could say that about it. So that in one sense, we could say anything has a weakness to it because it doesn't, it doesn't make me a sandwich when I come home at night. So like we can open that up to anything. But based on what the model is supposed to be about and what it's supposed to do, like, how did you find that to be a weakness, the fact that there is no such thing as an identity, but he clearly states that, and he clearly had that understanding. That's why he called it a self-concept. And what you said about self-concepting, we're selfing, Steve would have agreed with that. I don't know if he called it that in the book. I don't think he did. And that we're actually a combination of self-concepts. He said that in the book, and that your self-concept is the generalization of all of those concepts. So fully acknowledging that there is no actual thing called an identity, but you called that out as its greatest weakness.
Yeah, I tend to think that that's one of the main weaknesses of psychology in general, is that we tend to conflate thinking with being.
Okay, you said that in the video,
Yeah,
but
and
give me more to what you mean, that in a way that relates to the self-concept, the weakness of the self-concept model as you see it.
well, I so here's my belief. I think that most of our thinking is self-referential, right? Most of it revolves around our own identities in some way. And it seems to me that the main reason why we tend to suffer so much with thoughts and feelings is because we either seem fused with it, as in, I am these thoughts and feelings, basically, or because it seems as if I'm the author of them. Like, I kind of create them, I'm the architect behind them, and therefore they say something deeply personal about me. And then people easily get obsessed with having the right thoughts or the right beliefs or being in control over their internal state. So My tendency then is to think that I don't want to kind of help people reinforce that identification with thinking in general. Does that
But
make
if,
sense?
but if okay, so the point of the self-concept model is to acknowledge that it's not a real thing. Because if you think it's a real thing, then it really can't be transformed. Like, because when we think about actual things, there are very few physical things that we can actually transform. Like we can't take or we can't take lead and turn it into gold, right? So the premise of the self-concept model is that it is changeable because it's not an actual thing. So just like what you said about it being selfing and it's a process, completely agree with that. Steve would have agreed with that. And that is like the premise of it. And because it's a process, you can change it. So if the process is moving you in such a way that is causing you pain, that's limiting you, disconnecting you from the world around you, limiting your potential in any way, then that's what this model is about, is reorganizing that process and changing that process so that it does suit you, so that it does align with your values, so that you do experience fulfillment. So I'm still not grasping where you think that that's a weakness or a problem.
Well, my preference, and this is probably just a different preference between you and I in the way we work. I tend to be less concerned with helping people to change how they structure their experience. And I seem to gain more bang for the buck by helping people to really see the illusory nature of thinking to begin with. I don't
Well, that's a
find.
start, but that doesn't necessarily solve problems. And it can, that's a step I agree with you, it's a step into solving a problem. Like, okay, I suffered from depression twice. I don't think I could suffer from depression again simply because I see through exactly what you said, the illusion of that the depression is kind of a thing. No, it's a process. And so if I'm aware of the process and I can change it and then and I have, and like I haven't slipped into depression since. It's been like 15 years because I see through that illusion, but not just seeing through the illusion. I actually have a process and a step-by-step thing that I can do, or actually reversing the process would probably be more accurate. So just and I've worked with people because you can go and tell someone like the self-concept isn't a real thing. Your identity is not a real thing. It's not going to solve any problems though. You have to. There has to be more to it.
Not quite sure what you mean there. Could you elaborate a little or
Okay, so
a different angle?
if somebody's suffering from depression
Hmm.
and you tell them, well, depression's not real, okay, that's not going to do anything. Now, if you even break it down for them and say, here, it's not real and here's why, and you try to logic them out of it, I mean, it might work for some people. I'm not going to say it's never going to work, but I could tell you for myself, when I suffered from depression, that would not work. That would not work at all.
Yeah. Well, I've never ever told someone that depression isn't real. What I would tend to communicate to someone is that depression is a process of depressing, right? In terms of how you relate to your thoughts and feelings, and of course, you have different frameworks and different ways of understanding things, and none of these are entirely accurate. But in terms of, for example, depressing, my orientation is that when most people say that they're depressed, it's primarily an overthinking problem, like rumination, like a matter of how much ruminative thinking do they have going on.
And I completely agree with you on that. I'm just what I want to know is like where is the threshold of which just telling them these things shifts over to, well, now they don't feel depressed because they what? Like just see through the illusory nature of depression? I have a lot of skepticism of whether that will work. And here's the other thing too. I believe you probably have worked with people and helped them through that. But it's got to take more than just an understanding of it or seeing through the illusory nature of depression and the self and all of that.
Yeah. Well, there's a world of difference, of course, between just information or telling someone something, versus people having an insight, seeing something new, having a shift in
Okay.
experience.
So where does that insight come from?
Well, I think like most things in life, it comes from the interaction. If you give me a little bit of rope, so it's a bit like those questions that cognitive psychologists might ask their students sometimes, where they go, okay, let's say that there's a red book in the classroom, right? And they ask the question, well, if we all left the room, would there still be a red book in the classroom? And of course, most people would say, of course, yes, the red book is there. It's just that we can't see it. Now, scientifically, it seems as if the scientific research points in the direction of the redness not being inherent in the object, but it being emerging from the relationship between reflected light and a human eye and concepts and neurological processing, that the redness is emerges from the relationship, right? So as Milton Erickson used to say, our job is to kind of provide the context. So my job, I think, is to provide a context for someone where they can make some discoveries. And of course, those discoveries are only valuable to the extent that the client has a felt insight or a shift in perspective, or they suddenly see something new about their own experience. Now, way more often than not, and I'm not going to sit here and claim that all of my clients change, because they don't. But when people do, if I look back at the people who have been very depressed or very anxious, and they say they no longer are, if I ask them, what's different in your experience, very often you'll get an answer which is some version of, what, I used to have so much thinking around, my finances or my health or my relationship or my marriage or world politics or whatever, and now I hardly think that much about it anymore. And I think to make this relevant, I think one of the factors in the overthinking very often is this process of trying to think our way out of thoughts.
Okay, so I completely agree with all of that. I've heard you talk about that, and like, I don't disagree with any of that. But I don't understand how this like relates to a weakness of this model, which just acknowledges everything that you just said, that the self-concept is not real, which enables us to transform it. What we need to understand, and this is what I was getting at with insights, what happens when we have an insight? We gain access to I'll call it new information, but it doesn't mean the information wasn't there. It was always there. What happened is you restructured the experience. Now, I'm not saying that the self-concept model is the only way that you can do that. You can do it in other ways. It sounds to me like the questions or the kind of conversations you're having with your clients is very much like in the style of cognitive behavioral therapy, where you're just kind of like pulling on the information, and as you're pulling, something breaks free, and then there's a restructuring and more information comes in, and then now they have an insight.
Not really, not really.
Okay.
I would say that and I'm very familiar with cognitive behavior therapy and how that works, and not knocking it. But in the cognitive realm, of course, they spend a lot of time kind of working with the content of what people think in terms of challenging their assumptions and
Yeah, it's
asking,
definitely more content-based than NLP for sure.
looking at these various thought distortions like emotional logic and black and white thinking, and then trying to, and I think this is a key point, and then trying to change the irrational beliefs into more rational beliefs, right?
Yeah.
Whereas I'm more trying to help people see that this whole experience is a thought construct to begin with. You don't have to change it.
But is that not rooted in rationality?
Say again?
Is that not rooted in rationality?
Well, what do you mean?
Well, I mean, if you apply rationality to existence and experience and all of those things, you will end up with what you're talking about, where you realize that there is no such thing as self. And so it sounds to me like that's the basis of your questioning to the person until they come to the realization that this, whatever the problem is, isn't a thing. They can see through it, And then hopefully, because they can see through it, then they gain access to new information like I was talking about. The difference with the way that I work is, and I'm going to address this later because you say something like, well, you got to be really aware of, like what your internal structures and stuff like that. That's where I work. I want to bring that structure out of unconsciousness into consciousness, bring it into the light, pull it on the operating table. We look at it and we say, okay, what's working, what's not. We really focus on structure, not content, because you'll get caught up in content, you'll stay there forever. So we restructure, and we usually restructure based on a structure that is working for them. And then when we know that it works, we test it out. How does that feel? How do you think about things? The whole idea is to let it go back into unconsciousness because we don't want to be self-conscious, right? That's the primary. What I just gave you is kind of like an overview of the self-concept model.
Yeah. So to use a movie analogy, to me that looks a bit more like tinkering with the movie, or changing the scenes, or working on the distance from the screen, or how loud is the sound, these sorts of things. To use there's this old story of when the first movie was ever shown in Paris in 1895, where allegedly there was a train that seemed to be moving at high speed towards the people who watched the movie, and they'd never seen a movie before, and many of them freaked out and leapt from their seats.
Yeah.
Now, you and I don't do that, right? Like we don't call the cops if there's a break-in scene, during a TV series. We don't grab our knife and throw it at the bad guy. Like we never need to solve anything during a movie. Now, is that because we have more free will, or because we're more aware of any structures? I would argue no. It's just because we've had this insight into film that kind of helps us realize that no matter how real that train looks, it's not gonna run over me, because that's not how film works. And that insight in and of itself makes our relationship to any movie that we watch profoundly different, even though we might still prefer some movies over
Yeah.
others.
So let me ask you: do you enjoy movies?
Yes.
Okay. Even though you know they're not real,
Yes.
is that not a valid experience?
Probably more.
Exactly, exactly.
Probably
So
more.
that's my point about the self-concept model, because this is not stuck, and that, like, it's not just I'm an awful person, or whatever these things are, because I know that that's not really real, and I know how to restructure it, change it to suit me better, so that I get more out of the experience that I want. I mean, yeah. So, like, I mean, it's exactly that. It's like, if you can still enjoy the experience of a movie, still knowing that it's not real, that's the same thing that I'm doing. I mean, it's like, I have my life, and one time it really sucked. I made these internal changes and changed these structures. Now it's the best it's ever been, and I'm super fulfilled. It doesn't, and I was aware of that, the illusory nature of self. I spent years in non-duality before ever coming to NLP, but it didn't put food on my table. It didn't pay my bills. It didn't fix my marriage. It didn't fix my business. Came to NLP, got into the structure of how I'm structuring these experiences, and now I was able to access new information, better information, put both my conscious and unconscious focus on the information that's going to serve me better, kind of like as a user's manual for how to handle these situations in life. And then if they do go bad, take note of that, incorporate that mistake, like you did talk about in your video about counterexamples, and then I move on. So I just don't understand what the weakness is of that.
Well, congratulations. I'm I believe you. I'm happy for you. That's all. That's great. And I'm
I'm
not.
just not satisfied with your answer. Like, you call it a weakness, and I'm like, how? How is that a weakness? Like,
Well,
we agree on so much, but what is weak about that?
I think it reinforces the identification with
But
things.
I'm telling you, it doesn't. It's just like you said about the movie. You enjoy the movie more because you know it's not real. And the same thing, I enjoy my life more knowing that the concept of myself isn't real. Like, No?
Hmm. Well, I'm not saying not to do it. Although here's an interesting, and this might be an interesting point of potential disagreement.
Okay, good,
So,
please. Because I feel like we're agreeing on so much, and then you're just assessing it as a weakness in the model. And I'm like, we seem to be agreeing on almost everything.
well, so this notion that whatever makes the self concept more durable
Hmm.
also makes it more receptive to feedback.
Hmm.
This whole idea. I hope that's true.
Hmm.
Like, it's really cool if that is true. I'm very far from convinced that it actually is. So I'd ask you, like, how would we know that that was actually the case?
Well, in my own experience, to be wrong about something, past Damon, to be wrong about something felt like it invalidated my existence. So I would cling to even something when I knew it was wrong, because then I would slip into denial. Now, knowing that nothing can invalidate my existence because, I mean, I could be killed or something like that, but just being wrong is not threatening anymore. And because all the times that I have been wrong are integrated into my databases, which makes me more receptive to feedback. It's mixed in with my positive examples. My counter examples are de-emphasized, but they're still there, which gives me more discrepancy between how I want to be the qualities that I value and how I don't want to be the qualities that I value. And when I act out of alignment with that, it's pretty obvious because all the information is in one place. My database is actually right here. And so when that happens, like, I apologize far more when I goof up. And I'm aware far more when I goof up now than I was before. That's durability. It's not threatening to me because I'm just not afraid. And I'm not, like, as far as like failure goes, my fear of failure is almost non-existent. I mean, I don't want to fail because it's frustrating and you try something, you invest a lot of energy into something that sucks when it fails, but it has no bearing whatsoever on my validation of self, my existence or any of that stuff. Whereas before, it used to be like that very much.
So here's an interesting thing to consider. I mean, the way it looks to me is that, on the one hand, if people have a strong sense of identity, of being a particular way, like I'm X kind of person, right? Then yes, there does seem to be a push for internal consistency to act that way in the world. It also seems to be the case that the mind's press secretary or lawyer, if you will, can be extremely skilled at just massaging everything or spin doctoring everything in such a way that it supports this belief that I am,
Sure.
X type of person. So I'll give you a just practical example of this. I Many years ago, I worked with I not worked. I talked to a guy here in Norway who's a journalist and private investigator, and he's been involved in well, that was 10 years ago. So at that point, he had been involved in 10 of these exoneree cases of people who had served time for murder that they had in fact not committed. And he was one of the key players in kind of correcting those mistakes. And I really, admire his work. And I had the chance to speak to him, and I said to him, I'm really curious. In all these cases where the wrong guy's been jailed for 15 years, and the has anyone from in any of these cases, like from judges, prosecution, media people, investigators, has anyone ever apologized, like sincerely, or tried to do something to make things a bit less tragic? And he just started belly laughing. He said, "No, not once. Doesn't happen. They do
Yeah.
what they can to sabotage it, to get in the way of it."
Yeah.
And he said to me, "Remember, Jurgen, they view themselves as good people.
Yeah.
Like, they have this identity that they're good because they're on the right side of the law, and acknowledging these mistakes, would really threaten that sense of identity." And
Completely agree.
the point he made was that you always, in a case like that, you always need people who had no previous identification with the case. You need people from other parts of the country or higher up in the system who can kind of come in because,
Before you go further into that, what I want to ask you though is, would you perceive those people as having a strong sense of self or a weak sense of self?
well, that's a really interesting question because I've seen interviews with players in many of these cases, and they seem to have strong self concepts in the direction of no, we don't care about prestige, we don't care about protecting our own department. We care more about the pursuit of truth than anything else. I'm an honest person. I'm open to admitting mistakes, but they seem to have solid beliefs in that
Yeah,
direction.
but that's a different question. So you're telling me that they have illusions of being something that they're not. So does that make them have a strong sense of self and a strong self-concept, or a weak self-concept?
Well, what's your criteria for assessing that?
Well, you read the book.
Yeah,
It's basically Steve's criteria.
well, I mean strong. I mean, if you look at the level of like internal coherence.
Okay, so here's a problem that I think that a lot of people have with this idea of a strong sense of self and a weak sense of self. So let me ask you another question, because you brought this up too in the video. Does a narcissist have a strong sense of self or a weak sense of self?
I could go both ways on that.
Okay, so then how are you defining strong?
Well, on the one hand, it it seems to me as if you look at these, what people call cluster B personality tendencies, these ways of doing personality, if you will, like the borderlines and the narcissistic and the dissocial. One aspect of it does seem to be that people haven't really developed let's say, a continuous psychological sense of self over time.
Yes, and this is the other point that I was going to bring up, because that seems to be like what you think is a good thing. Like a less of a sense of self is a good thing, because you don't like, or you think the self-concept model is weak for wanting to strengthen the sense of self. So, so there's a lot of different directions that I could go with this, but like, would you say a person who can admit when they're wrong has a strong sense of self or a weak sense of self?
I think it depends on how you define it. Because
If I'm not threatened by admitting that I'm wrong, and I'm not like, oh, I'm so bad, I'm not doing that. I'm just saying, like, I goof up and I go, yeah, I goofed up. Or a person who like clings to it, like, and when it's obvious to everybody, and the evidence is everywhere, just like these people you were talking about in the legal system, and they refuse to admit that they're wrong. Who is the one with the strong sense of self?
I think that one's up for debate. I think it depends upon how you define it. So, for example, with people who are narcissistic, there is this one theory, which I think has something to it, that they have a very shaky sense of self, right? And that they're
Exactly,
kind
it's
of,
extremely.
and that they're kind of overcompensating.
And good luck trying to get them to admit when they're wrong. They will either they have one or two reactions to you. They either want to fight you, or they just want to get away from you, because you're putting in front of them evidence or truth that they're wrong. And why is that so threatening to them? Because they have a very weak sense of self, and that if that information gets in, they're afraid they're just going to that whole illusion of themselves is going to completely collapse. And that's why I would say they have a very weak sense of self. A person who can just acknowledge, yeah, I goofed up, or even, I acted in out of alignment with what I value. This is important to me, and I went this other direction. I'm sorry, and I'm going to do right by myself, and other people. That I would count as a person who has a strong sense of self.
On the other hand, though, I mean, there is some research that points in a different direction. That when these people have these kind of grandiose claims about themselves and their own competencies and stuff like that, that many of them seem to actually truly believe it. and not have insecurities around that
But if
really
it's
at all.
so inaccurate, if you think you're the smartest person in the room and everybody thinks you're the dumbest, that probably comes from a weak sense of self, an inability to acknowledge what's going on around you, which is not. I don't consider that a strong person, a strong sense of self.
I would agree. I would agree
Okay.
that it's not it's not a sign of strength, right?
Not at all. It's a sign of weakness. I mean, I think if you can't admit when you're wrong, that's a sign of weakness.
I would agree. I would
Okay.
agree.
All right.
Yeah,
So I win.
I would agree.
All right. So just real quick, I see some questions coming in. We'll get to your questions. We
I have,
have more to
I have
do.
another interesting one too to kind of throw at you,
Okay.
and
Yep.
and that is that I kind of doubt that we're really making the unconscious conscious in a sense that we're really gaining access to how we structure our experience. I have more of a suspicion that we're actually suggesting it into being in the moment. So let me give you a couple of examples of this. So take, for example, the activity of perception. I walk to the window, I look outside, I see green, I see a blue sky, not as blue as I would like at this time of year, but a blue sky, right? But I have zero access to the processes that the color blue emerges out of. It's like the cookie that comes out of the oven, but I have no access to the kitchen whatsoever. I have only access to the final output, if you will. I don't think thinking and feeling in that sense really works any different than perception. So it's a bit like, in NLP, for example, when people quote unquote elicit timelines and people discover their timeline, is there really a timeline there? Are we really eliciting or discovering something? Or are we kind of co-creating, suggesting something into being, and people get absorbed into that idea and it looks real?
So you don't think that there is a structure to our subjective experience?
Didn't say that, but I don't think we have introspective access to the processes that our experience emerges out of in the same way with the color red or the color blue.
I mean, you spent quite a few years in NLP. I mean, isn't that what NLP essentially is? Is about becoming conscious of how you structure this information, which is process, strategy, submodalities. Like, do you not agree with that? Or I mean, are we going backward
Yeah,
to?
well, that is kind of the assumption, right? That we're kind of uncovering stuff, making the unconscious conscious. I
So let me ask you. So like, when you were a kid, and you might have lived in different places, but just out of curiosity, when you were a kid, what was the color of the walls in your bedroom?
What are the colors of the walls in my bedroom? Huh? I'll go back to Dubai. What were they? I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure actually.
Okay. Well, did you have a pet when you were a kid?
Yeah, yeah. I had a dog named Julia, by the way. It was
Well, my wife's name is Yulia, not Julia. But
no, but at least it's spelled the same. But it
I
was a
don't know if you can hear her, but you really made her laugh. That was
so
good.
I have a strong love for just the name Julia, because
Okay, so right now that dog is not present, but you have a way of knowing that you had that dog still, right? That you probably can see the dog, you can remember the color of its fur, right? It's coded in such a way that you know that she's not here right now in front of you. This is a past pet, right? I mean, do you not go into that? I mean, do you not buy into all that? Or you just think that
well,
you're,
as you speak, obviously, there's some feeling sensations, and an image did appear when you kind of called for it, but
so how is that not like everything
well,
that we're talking about?
because I think that image is a bit like the color red I see if I look out the window, or the color blue. It's the end result of a bunch of processes that we really have. No access.
Sure. I'm not saying we have access to all of the processes. I think what we have access to, if we choose to sit with it, is access to processes that can make a huge difference in our life. Do we have access to it all? I seriously doubt that. I mean, it's sort of like this. Do I have access to
I don't
making,
think we really have access to any of it.
so do I have access to making my body healthier and my heart pump more efficiently because I exercise? Yeah, I have that. Can I actually stop my heart beating just by thinking about it right now? No, I can't. I can't. There's processes there that I can't access, but there are processes there that I can affect and make myself healthier. You know, make myself feel better internally. Right? You agree with that?
Yeah, that we can somehow affect our experience.
So I think it's the same way with NLP. It's that I can't affect everything, but I can take stuff, just like you were talking about with the processing of like depressing instead of it being depression. If you can work with a client to interrupt that and change it, is it not the same thing that we're talking about?
Yeah, if I can influence them to see something different, or for them
Right.
to
So
kind of,
you acknowledge we have agency over that.
seemingly, yeah.
Well, if a person was once depressed and they're not anymore, I mean, what else do you need to know? I mean, if it's worked, it worked, right? You got the
Yeah,
response of it.
they see something new. They have a different relationship to their experience, for sure.
I mean, it almost seems like what you're saying would invalidate all change work, that we can't really change anything. But you know that we can because that's your job. That's what you do for a living.
Well, in terms of the whole agency thing, I mean, of course, there's will, there's change. There's no one doing it, right? Really, like that. That's the illusory part of it.
Okay, so there's something
That's
coming
the
through that,
add-on.
well, there's something that's happening. So this kind of brings me to another thing. Like you do agree that we have beliefs, right? That's like a thing, not a thing, and it's something you can pick up and put in your pocket. But it's a happening, right? You do have beliefs, right?
Seems that way, yeah.
Okay, and you also that includes beliefs about yourself, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And even if you can see through the illusory nature of them, they do affect how you think, how you feel, the behavior you do. You agree with that, right?
Yeah, even though here's an interesting thing too, because I think you made the claim that well, self concept is kind of destiny in a way, or not sure if I'm paraphrasing,
Self-fulfilling prophecy? Is
huh?
that self-fulfilling prophecy?
Something like that, that you can't really perform above, or that if you have a self concept being a screw up, you'll find a way to screw up essentially, and
Yeah, yeah.
if you have a this one's a really interesting one too, because I often wonder, like you're aware of the old split brain experiments, right,
Mm,
where they sever the corpus callosum and could communicate with the hemispheres
mm,
independently, and where it was kind of discovered that even when the right hemisphere was given some instruction to do something, and then the left hemisphere afterwards with these patients were asked, why did you do that? Of course, the proper answer would be, I really have no clue. I haven't been in touch with the right hemisphere for a while. Like the left hemisphere would always make something up, just
mhm.
make something up that kind of makes sense.
You're kind of getting into confirmation bias, right? That's
What I kind of wonder often with this stuff too is like how much of these stories and self concepts are kind of like ad hoc rationalizations that the left hemisphere kind of makes after the fact. Like I'm reminded of this famous study from Israel with judges, where judges were asked, well, how do you know when to give people parole? And judges would say, well, I'm objective. I look at the evidence. I use my reasoning skills, so on and so forth. Were two big studies like this. And then they were able to track that there was a very solid correlation between like the blood sugar levels, like when the judges had eaten,
mm,
and when they kind of granted parole. So basically, if it was right after breakfast, you had a good chance. Right before lunch, you were basically screwed. Friday afternoon, forget it. You're fucked. But the judge's kind of self concept of how do you make these decisions, or I'm rational, I'm this and that. At least to some extent, seem to have Of course, we can't say that it's just the blood sugar thing, right? So,
well, it
but
sounds to me like you're talking about state and how state affects. what we do. But that's why I don't like to work in states, which is old school NLP. I like to work in beliefs, which are much more stable.
Well, but the interesting point here, I think, is the self concepts of the judges as rational actors, at as people who kind of, I look at the evidence. I'm a guy who the how much of a relationship did that really have in terms of what might be cooking under the surface in terms of how these decisions were actually made?
So what I would say is that that's not a very accurate self-concept. That's not a very strong self-concept. This is not a person who's updating, like looking for feedback and then updating themselves based on that feedback, which is essential to the self-concept model. And that's why we build in counterexamples to be open to that feedback so that we can receive it rather than block it out just because we have a strong belief otherwise. And that's what makes these beliefs so strong and durable. The self-concepts, as you're calling it, them so strong and durable because we become sensitive to the feedback and we're able to receive it. Now, is it going to be 100%? No, because nothing else is. And I think a lot of what you're talking about is like bias. And so my whole thing is like, what is the solution that you're suggesting? Because we're not going to get rid of our biases. That is never going to happen. The best that we can do is just be aware of our biases and just know that this is how we're selecting and collecting information. The confirmation bias, I think you mentioned this in your video, it's like, because I know that about myself, that I know that I'm going to have a tendency to select and collect information that shows that I'm right. Now that I know that, then I can also see beyond it. And so this is the part where I agree with you on seeing through it. That's built into the model. This is why I don't think it's a weakness. It's it's a
To
strength.
what extent and again, I'm not going to claim to know a solid answer to that. I'm just like, to what extent do you think that this model kind of corrects for confirmation bias in a way, or even the fact of being aware of these biases, like to what extent that helps us to reduce them, or might even make us better bullshit artists and deceiving ourselves that we're still rational, right? Um,
Well, that's where the counterexamples come in, and that's where we're more sensitive and more open to feedback. Like what I was talking about before, where like to be wrong felt like it was invalidation of my existence. Well, that doesn't feel that way anymore, and I know I'm the only person who can validate what's important to me. Everything else is feedback. And therefore, feedback is not scary to me anymore. It used to be, but it's not anymore. And now that I'm very clear about my values, I have transformed these qualities so that I'm very certain and solid about them. I'm much more aware when I'm out of alignment with them as a result. So again, nothing's going to be perfect, but it's like I don't really understand what is the alternative you would suggest here, because you know that you can't get rid of your biases. The best you can do is just be aware of them. Not that this model doesn't treat specifically biases, but it does welcome feedback, makes you more sensitive to it, which I don't know of any other way
I'm
to help everybody deal with a bias.
I'm just curious to what extent it actually helps us to reduce cognitive dissonance to some extent. Like, I have this belief, and of course, ironically, given that I believe it, I see it everywhere, right? But that belief is kind of like that cognitive, that confirmation bias is one of our biggest challenges. Like
For sure,
collectively,
no doubt about it.
this tribal mentality that we tend to have, and this difficulty in seeing stuff that doesn't quite match, the biases that we tend to have. So if this can help with that, that might be the biggest contribution of the model.
Okay,
And I can't say that it does or it doesn't. I'm just
my wife
curious.
said that we were going to end up going 2 hours, and I said, "There's no way." And I think we might that might turn into this. I want to get to a quote you said. Actually, there was a lot of quotes you said, and I'm going to skip a lot of them and try to get just straight to the ones that I think are the most important. You said, "I would say I would say the major downside of this particular model, it doesn't point beyond thought and thinking and representation." First of all, I would disagree with that. But what do you mean by that? And then what's the alternative?
The alternative is consciousness itself.
So just sit in a vegetative state without beliefs, without representations, without thoughts, without acknowledgement of any of these things, and you just kind of sit there.
I don't think that would naturally follow at all.
So what would naturally follow? I mean, then there's one end on the spectrum where like we call them a vegetable, and I don't mean to be calling that out to like people who are in a coma. I'm not doing that at all, because people in a coma actually still have structure in their mind and all of that's still happening. But like if you were to find a person who was just physically alive and not processing thought or any of these things, they would literally be like in a vegetative state. And then there's probably the people who are in between, which are the people you called out as type B personalities, the narcissists, right? Sociopaths. And then there's people like, well, I would consider you as well. Me and you, we're pretty healthy. We're able to have these kind of conversations without taking it personal.
I was expecting you were going to say like borderline psychopaths.
Well, that's what I thought you were until we hung out, and then I was really like, okay, this guy,
Well,
this, the
but that,
perception in my head I had of you before I met you was very much that.
yeah. But that's the kind of relief of seeing this too, to kind of have the realization that none of these, you're not essentially made up of any of these ideas, right?
Yeah, but that's what but like
Liberation.
you acknowledge, we're still going to have beliefs. We're still going to have beliefs about ourselves. The beliefs about ourselves are going to be the beliefs that affect us most, how we feel, how we behave, how we interact with others. Why would you not want to structure that in a way that serves you as best as it possibly could?
Doesn't really appeal to me. It just
Okay.
doesn't.
Okay.
It just doesn't. Even though I'm curious because when I first read Steve's book back in the day, I was very curious. I didn't quite get the outcomes with clients or myself that I was looking for. That might be my limitation. It's a long time ago. I mean, this is like back in 2002, 2003, 4. And I believe you, and I'm super happy for you with the results you're getting. So it's not a knocking
I
and I,
didn't take it personal. Yeah.
I see applications. I mean, if you look at, I mean, if we take selfing, I mean, one of the strong theories for infantile amnesia, right? That we tend to not remember memories before the age of 2 and 3, later, is it seems as if we need to. It is neurogenesis and the hippocampus hasn't developed properly, but also that we tend to need a kind of sense of self to be able to
Sure.
have these autobiographical memories
To navigate the world, to have
and
relationships. Yeah.
selfing
Yes.
seems crucial in helping people to you know develop the ability to kind of make distinctions and to have theory of mind and to
Yeah.
have proper
I spent a
boundaries.
lot of time in non-duality. One of the biggest
Yeah,
things that where people would go wrong with that is to think that these so-called sages, these non-dual sages, didn't have a sense of self or a
right,
self-concept or a personality or ego, and that was complete bullshit. They
I agree.
absolutely did.
Yes,
They were kind of doing what you're doing, which is just saying like see beyond it. And it's like that. Like I said, it didn't put food on my table, didn't fix my marriage, didn't pay my bills. I had to I was having real trouble sorting through that stuff, and NLP, and then eventually this model was. I mean, and it wasn't just about solving problems. Like in my life that I'm living now, like things are happening that I'm like, wow, like this, I didn't even know this was possible. And so anyway, that's my commercial for this model.
yeah.
Let me just grab a few more things, or let me check. We might have actually covered some of the things that I wanted to cover about, and then I want to get to your model, so I can destroy it. I'm kidding. So we can ask you
Oh,
questions
that
about.
would be fun. We can do that.
All right. Okay. Well, we kind of covered this other piece. Okay, I think for the most part, we covered it. So I'll say this: I'm not quite satisfied with your answers. I was actually hoping you would we would have more disagreement, and we would really pick that apart and kind of pull something out of it. But I think what you said is something that I would say to your challenge about working with people who are sociopaths or narcissists. You just say, I'm just not that interested. And that is a key part to this. It really is. And when it comes to like NLP, people will come to me and say, can NLP help me? Can it solve my problems? And I say, absolutely. But it does take an interest in learning it. Like that has to be a part of it.
Hmm.
And so if you're just not interested in going this direction, then okay, then yeah, that's just it. And I wouldn't fault you for that. I wouldn't say that, you just don't know what you're missing or anything like that. It's just you're just not interested. And that's where it comes to like working with sociopaths or narcissists, because you actually kind of challenged me on that. And that's why I'm not a therapist. Like I don't want to work with that population.
I just threw out this idea where I thought, if someone, whether that be you or someone listening, one of your
Sure,
students, like if you wanted to like put NLP on the mainstream or do something really cool with it, it could be. I mean, if you look at the borderline, the cluster B personality tendencies,
absolutely.
one of the big things there seems to be that they haven't developed this kind of continuous sense of self over time, which you would need to kind of be able to take personal responsibility and care about consequences and not be so impulsive and stuff like that. So if you could, well, contact the organization psychopathy is, or something like that, and work with some of these folks who are looking to make those changes, that could be like a really cool contribution.
Sure.
Or as I said, with regular client work, it seems to me I've spent a lot of time working with people with chronic pain and autoimmune conditions and stuff like
Yeah.
that. And I can't prove this scientifically,
Sure.
but it does seem to me that more often than not, many of the people who struggle with stuff like that have a problem living from first position, meaning they're too self-appeasing. They don't quite have the proper boundaries and stuff like that. So I think for a lot of those folks too, to be able to develop that sense of self, however illusory it might make a big difference. It would be a really interesting experiment. I'll add this to the thing you said. If you look at many of the authors out there, people like Byron Katie or Eckhart Tolle, or I'm mentioning these folks because people will have heard about them, most likely.
Mm.
The people who've had these awakenings, if you will, uh, it seems to be the common denominator that these people have at some point seen that there is a distinction between thinking and being. That the identity is no longer, it no longer looks as if they are depressed, in the sense that they are fused with the content of their thinking moment by moment. So helping people to see the illusory nature of thought and to kind of discover, or how do I word this? To more identify, if you will, with consciousness itself, rather than the content of thinking moment by moment, has there's a lot of liberation to be found in that. And it doesn't seem to me as if the self-concept model points in that direction.
But it's
That's
so
my
it's not the function of it, but it also doesn't deny that. Like Steve used to, he didn't put this in the book, but in some of his trainings, he used to call your self-concept a lie, and then he would say, "But is it a good lie?" It's like a bias. It's going to exist. There's not any getting rid of it. All the people who you just mentioned, who are supposedly enlightened, I have my doubts about some of the ones you mentioned, but they all still have a self-concept. That there's no getting rid of that. So it's like, how well is that functioning for you? And it's sort of like, and I think Steve used the same analogy. It's kind of like a GPS that helps you orient in time and space, with relationships, with the different contexts of your life, getting the most out of these contexts that you want so you can be fulfilled. And that's exactly what it's done for me. And when I work with clients, and they don't have to have all that awareness that we're talking about, because it's like the meta model. You don't have to have the awareness of deletion, generalization, distortion in order for the client that doesn't have to have that understanding for a person who's skilled in the meta model to ask the right questions to elicit what they need. And self-concept's the same way. So like as a coach, and if I'm working with someone, they don't have to know NLP, they don't have to be aware of all this stuff. I've trained over the last 10 years in how to elicit that from someone. The last thing I want to say about the self-concept model, as it relates to what you were talking about with the narcissist and the sociopaths, and then we'll get to your model, is that I have I really don't have any interest in working with those people because I didn't know I was dealing with a
Where's your
narcissist.
sense of adventure, Damon?
Well, I've dealt with a person who I didn't know they were a narcissist, and actually they're kind of well known in a particular country, not the U.S. and not Romania, where I'm at right now. But anyway, I'm not going to name his name. But I realized after a while I was dealing with a full-on narcissist, and I'd already gotten away from him by that point, and it was miserable. Everything was great at first, and then you think everything's great, and then everything's just gradually getting worse and worse. But I have had people come to me for coaching who, I'm not a therapist, I wouldn't feel comfortable diagnosing with someone with narcissistic personality disorder, but I was pretty sure that they were on the spectrum. I don't know how far, but the first thing is good luck finding a borderline or a narcissist who thinks they need help. Like that's the first thing. That's very difficult to get that person to even think that. The second thing is when you're working with them, they think they're smarter than you, of course. And so they're always trying to play games with you. And so it's really hard to do good work with someone who's trying to do that. So I found myself always trying to like spend most of my time and my energy just trying to stay a step ahead of them. And then, sometimes I'd just get to the point where I'd be like, okay, do you actually want my help? Like, you paid me a lot of money to coach you. Do you want some sort of change here? And oftentimes they didn't. It was the strangest thing. And then finally I would tell them, I would say, I think this is what your issue is. And well, even before that, I would do that. I would probe around about like, what were their parents like? And almost always there was one really narcissistic parent and one who was like the complete opposite, like what do they call that? Codependent. Okay. And then I would say, okay, this is what I think you're dealing with. And, I'm not diagnosing you because I can't do that, but you might want to look into this. I think you are on the narcissistic spectrum. And we couldn't get anything to stick. Like nothing would stick. I would try to structure things. They could create it and then it would disappear. And they could create it and it might work a little bit, disappear. And it was just so frustrating to work with that. And it's like, it's just not what I want to do. It's just a lack of interest. So that's where I come from on that.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Well, I have a quick comment on that, by
sure.
the way. Because one thing that's kind of happened I've been in this game for, this is my 28 years, and in the last decade or so, especially the last 5 years, a lot of the terminology from what you could call like the narcissism industry has kind of trickled into the mainstream.
Mhm.
Like people who are not interested in psychology in particular will talk about narcissistic rage and gaslighting
Mhm.
and kind
Mhm.
of use that terminology. And what I've noticed in recent years, just in terms of self-concepting, is so many people coming in and saying, "Oh, my ex was a narcissist," that sort of stuff,
Yeah.
right? And I'm not saying that there aren't people who have more than their fair share of those character traits, in the world. But I also think that there's a kind of self-concept game or selfing game going on in the sense that, well, first of all, where they kind of come in and by saying, okay, my ex was a narcissist, kind of implies, I'm pure, I'm innocent, I'm
Yeah.
kind of the victim, I was just seduced, I was just charmed, I was. It gives people a kind of alibi to not really look at their own contributions or see their own
Yeah.
part in anything.
Yeah. Narcissists are very attractive to other narcissists. It's
Oh
very
yeah,
true.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I mean, most of the narcissistic guys will probably attract the borderline women, and vice versa, because
Yeah.
that's kind of resonates.
Mhm. Yeah.
So,
Absolutely. All right. Let's
so
talk about your model.
sure,
All
sure.
right. Uh, tell me. So I did read, I think, most of your book, which was more about for
The,
the
the,
version
the
that I
draft
read.
the draft thing, I
Yeah, it was a lot of the working with clients and then your assessment of it. And I don't know if it's changed since then, but my feedback to you was like I don't really have a strong sense of like what the model is. And we had a little bit of this discussion, I think, the last time we saw each other in London. And one of my things was I was like, Jurgen, I'm not sure if this is a model. And you were open to that feedback, so your self concept must be strong.
I mean, theory. If we get pedantic about it, theory would probably be more accurate in the terms of a framework, right?
Okay.
Than a model.
And
Yeah.
actually, before you get into this, actually, Yulia, can you figure out how to do a poll right now while everybody's on, where they can say who, I don't know if won or lost is the right way that we can talk about our discussion about self-concept. Maybe we just use those words because they're the easiest words to use, but also an option, who won, Damon, Jurgen, or no one won. It's just a discussion. Can you figure that out?
I think you can just tell them to write that in the live chat.
There is a way to do a poll. See if you can do the poll.
I cannot from EVMux.
Ah, okay. You can't go into the YouTube studio and do it?
Um,
Just do your best, and then we can ask people for feedback. It'd just be for fun. I don't feel like there was real knockdown, drag out anything. I think it was we're just discussing, and but it would be fun just to know what people think. Anyway, so how would you start off? Like, if I knew nothing about it whatsoever, how would you start off explaining it?
Well, just for the audience, and this is again just a framework. I think if you work with someone who wants to make some sort of change, you can work at the behavioral level, right? And there are plenty of approaches that do that, like systematic desensitization and ordeals and stuff like that. You could work with the content of thinking, which would be more, let's say, psychoanalysis or CBT to some extent, kind of cares more about the what. You could work more with the process or the structure of meaning making, as neuro linguistic programming does, quite well. And then you have these approaches like ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, and metacognitive therapy, which are more in that, well, let's change our relationship to our experience. That's a kind of. And then there's this other framework, which is like, well, what if we could point people in the direction of seeing the illusory nature of their experience? So to just use I think an analogy, if I can offer one analogy and just one practical thing, I think that might be a good way to point people in this direction. So let's say that the time machine was here, and let's say that we dragged some guy from the 1500s or something, into the US or Norway, and AI had developed to the point where we could put a chip in his brain and he could understand English or Norwegian, and is going to spend a few days. So we go, what would be a cool introduction to modern Western culture? And let's say that David Copperfield was in town, right? The magician. So we go, we'll take him to a magic show. That'll be cool and interesting with special effects and all sorts of stuff. But let's say that we neglected to tell the person anything about magic. And let's imagine that it's his girlfriend or daughter or whoever that gets put up on stage and seemingly decapitated or sawed in two by the magician. Well, and the question is like, how would that person likely respond? Well, he could have different responses, but they would probably all be very disproportionate and not useful, as in rushing the stage to kill David Copperfield, right? Or to save the girlfriend. They might have rage, they might have deep fear, they might have enormous grief afterwards. And then the question becomes like, why don't you or I respond that way, during the magic show, if it's our wife or daughter who's seemingly getting decapitated? Now, we might be nervous, or we might be kind of excited about it. We might be intellectually trying to figure out the trick, but we're not going to try to kill David Copperfield. Why? Because no matter how real it looks to us, we know that the way it looks to us is a thought created illusion. And that in and of itself allows us to enjoy the show and to not freak out and to not have to change anything. Now, granted, you'll still like some magic tricks and some magic shows more than others, right? But on a deeper level, it won't matter that much what seems to be happening on the stage, because you know that the very fact that it seems to be happening is your evidence that It's not really occurring in that way. And this is what I do my best to do with people when they come in and they're stuck in their thinking. I'm looking through thought experiments, through either hypnotic phenomena, storytelling, paradoxes, to help them to kind of discover the illusory nature of it. Ironically, and I'll give you the case study, if you read my first book, the very first case story there is a very early client of mine who was scared around heights. And I tried to kind of persuade him in the office that it was the way he thought about heights and not the heights themselves. And it just didn't land. And I'd gotten him to take his climbing shoes with him because he worked as one of those phone technicians who would climb the poles, and he was terrified, right? So this was a bad job for him unless he could change it. So I said, okay, we're going outside. We're going to climb that pole, and we had the agreement that he would do so. And he was really anxious on the ground. And I said to him, on a scale from 0 to 10, where are you at? I can't remember the number, but I think maybe a 4 or 5. And then he climbed, got more anxious, all the way up there, and he was like, 10. This is horrible. And I said, you can come you can come down now, right? And he started coming down, and he hadn't come down that much. And I said, how do you feel now? And he was like, not that bad, because I know I'm going down. And when he landed on the ground, because I saw my opportunity there as a shark, right? And I kind of grabbed him at the moment he landed to kind of destabilize him and put him there. And I said, you were on a 5 standing on the ground. You were lower than that, being quite a bit up there. How on earth could it be the height? And in that moment, of course, I didn't really have that much skills at the time. I was lucky with this one, but he had an insight. He saw the illusory nature of it, and we didn't really need to do anything else. And that was kind of like an experience for me of like, how could how can I, in kind of artistic ways, help people to have such insights into the nature of their experience?
So it sounds to me like I know you spent years in NLP and hypnosis, and I know you read a lot. I don't know what other trainings you've done, but it sounds to me like the way you work is more from a sort of a theory, a framework, or like not even a framework, but just like a frame around it. And then you just grab whatever tool you feel like, because you've been trained in many, you grab whatever tool you feel like is necessary for the situation. Would you say that's correct?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
But always. So, and I mean, for me, I mean, I'm not married to my framework. And if you've seen a couple of my speeches, and I'm very straightforward in saying, look, not all people like this or will necessarily respond to this,
Mhm.
and that's perfectly fine. And I can, I've done a lot of courses in various forms of psychotherapy. I can work, I can work at the behavioral level with someone. I can do good content work. I can do good structure work.
Mhm.
And sometimes with some people that's a way better match. It's just I like this particular way of working, and it was often a big bang for the buck. I had a kind of epiphany of like, I worked with this woman who had like a fear of people getting sick. So she was at university just down the street here, and if someone was sneezing or she'd get like really nauseous and was not useful. I tried to do this type of work. Like she did not at all. Like she kind of intellectually got it, but she
Mhm.
didn't really. I thought, oh shit, like what do I do? And then I turned on my computer. I had her sit in this very chair, watch the computer screen. I went to YouTube and I punched in puking videos. Right? And she watched that and she was just like horrified. And I used to have this tennis ball at my office. And this isn't my technique. I stole it from someone, but I had her throw the tennis ball, back and forth over the midline. Probably works a bit like EMDR for like
Yeah.
a minute. She did it again. Most of the response was gone. Did it again, gone. Now, it looked like the most dramatic, and I'm sure you've done this many times and seen it in NLP courses, like a really if you have someone who's like really good at going into states, and you
Mhm.
do like a really well placed collapse anchors, it just looks like they're in the washing machine, or it's just
Yeah.
this like, and that was it. And of course, that was unusual. Most people, I've tried to do that with other people without anything happening necessarily, but right, it just points to that at the end of the day, like it's what the client can meaningfully respond to. And but even when I do more behavioral work or other modalities, I kind of always try to point them in this direction with various degrees of success.
When I first saw you give a talk, which was probably, man, it's probably been 5 years, the first time we met. The demonstration you gave, which I was amazing because you pulled three people up and you did a demonstration simultaneously with all of them. A lot of what you're talking about reminds me of that, where especially with the whole, because I think everyone had anxiety, like you wanted to bring people up who had anxiety,
Right.
and what you did with like the story that they of their self is sort of like this alternate reality, and then they have this future, and this is what's causing them anxiety, and then you help them understand that like they don't have the same that imagined self doesn't have the same destiny as you do. I thought that that was brilliant. And it sounds, I mean, is this like what I saw in that talk? Is this basically what you're talking about now? The
Yeah,
model
yeah,
that you're
yeah.
okay.
That could be a typical, a very typical application. Like I had a guy recently, for or not that long ago, for like jealousy, and let's just call his wife Marie, just to make up a name.
Mhm.
And there was no evidence that his actual wife Marie had done any, anything naughty or anything. But he had these obsessive thoughts about her cheating and stuff like that. And I just had him, well, just imagine Marie in your mind. Imagine that she's out and about doing her thing, and he'd get like really. I said to him, now answer me. Are you experiencing Marie, or are you experiencing a thought labeled Marie? And thought labeled Marie. Is the thought labeled Marie the same as Marie? And at first, I didn't quite know, so I said, "Well, imagine Marie getting hit by a bus. Now call Marie to make sure she's okay." And I've had to do that at seminars a few times, where one person actually called her husband and said, "Are you okay?" After,
Well, you did that in the presentation you gave. You actually made someone call their mother because he was afraid of
yeah,
his
because
mother.
it
Yeah,
didn't get the distinction between the thought
yeah.
and suddenly he had this realization, like he started belly laughing, and he suddenly went, "Oh my god, I've been interrogating the wrong woman." Like he suddenly had this visceral insight, right? That this thought created character in his mind called Marie was not the same as his wife Marie, that she didn't share his destiny, right? And of course, not everybody gets that quickly. But he just had this like, oh my god moment of like,
Mhm.
ah. And I said to him, I said, yeah, it's a bit like, imagine that I'm your paranoid neighbor, and I'm having, let's call him Tom, I'm having this Tom character in my mind who's in my shed, borrowing stuff and stealing my apples. And, every time I get really worked up about this, I call you or I go over to you to have a conversation to get to the bottom of things. Like that sort of thing.
Before I ask you what you're going to teach in the workshop, I do want to mention that if you're finding this interesting, and trust me, listening and especially when you're giving presentations and you're teaching, it's always at the very least entertaining and fun, and I always get a lot out of it, and that's why I love talking to you and hanging out with you. So
Excellent.
for those of you who want to attend that, like I said, it's free if you're part of one of my memberships. The lowest threshold training that or cost for training is my ultimate NLP practitioner, which you'll find the link to in the description below this video, which you get the entire training, you get a community, and you get these bonus trainings, which I'm spending a lot more time inviting guests to do that. In a few months, October, I think we're going to have, no, it's this month, September actually, or maybe October, we're going to have Connie Ray Andreas. She's the next one who's coming. And also, you have a big training coming up, right? You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I have actually a Seeing Through the Self-Illusion masterclass coming up, which is going to be 10 Tuesdays starting late September. And every week I'm going to do my best to help someone have a felt shift into that realization live.
Hmm.
It's going to be just 10 weeks of experiments and inquiry. So anyone interested can go to provocativehypnosis.com and just check out the seminar page.
Cool. And by the way, like there's nothing in all of our discussions, there is nothing you've ever said about the way that you work or the way that you think that is in conflict with the self-concept model. And I don't think there's anything in the self-concept model that is in conflict with, what you're saying. I just take offense that you think it's weak. No, I'm joking.
I never said I think it's weak. And there's this, as you said previously, I mean, everybody does have self concepts. And, like if you look into developmental psychology, I mean, we all seem to develop a sense or move towards kind of constructing a seemingly separate permanent self over time. And then some people move on and kind of deconstruct it. So I mean, doing the type of work I do for a lot of people would be a complete mismatch because it would also be beginning to deconstruct something that someone hasn't even begun constructing. Like that's one of my, and I love John Grinder, by the way, so this is not a dig at him as a person. But I remember being in many of his trainings and, him going, all beliefs are limiting and, identity is a deep trap and that sort of stuff. And for me, that really resonated. But some people in that course might be people who they haven't even really developed that. Like they might be so fused with the group or the family, and
For
they're,
sure.
they're just beginning to find their own voice and their own identity, and that's a healthy developmental thing you want to encourage. And then Grinder comes in, and just kind of tears down the whole project.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think self concept work is in all likelihood going to be a great match for a lot of people. So it's not a me saying that it's bad or don't do it or anything like that
Well,
whatsoever.
and what I would say is it actually works better when you have the kind of understandings that you're putting across, seeing through the illusion. It was a wonderful gift for me to have spent years in non-duality before taking my first NLP training, because like you were saying, like people was struggling, I saw people really struggling with not being able to differentiate between reality and their beliefs. And I was like, no, I was already there. I was already like, no, beliefs are not real, which made it much easier to work with them and change them. So yeah, having the understandings that you're putting across for your model would only help you understand self-concept even better and be able to work with it faster and better. We will get to questions, or we'll look at the questions in the comments section, the questions section. But first, would you tell us a little bit about what you're going to teach next week in my membership program?
Yes, we're going to do some fun little experiments, hopefully to help people to see that. Well, we kind of called it neutralizing painful thoughts and feelings, which is accurate to some extent, but it's really about kind of seeing that they're neutral. Like there's no inherent experience you have to have given a particular thought or feeling, and that's one of the kind of limitations that the metacognitive therapists talk about this. They talk about thought fusions.
Mm.
That people have a particular thought, and it seems as if a particular behavior or a particular feeling or a particular thought has to follow. And it's kind of about breaking those associations and have a felt experience of the neutrality of it. That's been very useful for many of my clients.
Great. So yeah, I can assure you, if you attend this, you're going to enjoy it. It's always a good time when Joergen's teaching. All right, great. So let's look over here. There have been a lot of comments. I probably can't read them all. Let's see.
There's some questions that were put earlier on if you want to scroll all the way to the top.
Yeah, I went all the way to the top here. Okay. So someone's saying, when you see through the illusion of the self, there isn't any sense in doing anything to change it. It's not really a question, it's more of a statement. Well, I don't agree. What are your thoughts on that, Jürgen?
Uh, well, yeah, like to me, it kind of looks like trying to work on something which isn't really there, in the sense of, but of course you don't need to change it. But as Damon, I mean, you see it as illusory, and you use it as an artist to kind of construct a different
Another
experience,
way of putting it, yeah.
and the fact that, I mean, the fact that you don't need to doesn't mean that you can't, or that
Or
you
that you shouldn't. Yeah,
right, right.
yeah. Okay. So someone asks, where does failure fit into the psychological illusion model?
Um, could the person elaborate, perhaps, like what they mean by that? I'm not quite.
Okay.
I'm not
Right.
quite sure what the person's asking. I'm not
Okay.
trying to be difficult.
Yeah, Blitzer658, who put a lot of comments in here. We'll probably get to more of this person's comments, but go ahead and if you want to elaborate, as I move through the comments, I'll get to it. Let's see. Okay, constructing a self-concept in which you don't believe, knowing there is no self seems counterproductive. How do you trick yourself into believing and benefiting from something you know isn't true? That goes back to what I was saying, that you are going to have beliefs. I mean, we can't navigate the world without beliefs, and you're going to have beliefs about yourself. And those beliefs actually is really like if you think of a tree trunk, you can't have the roots and the branches without the tree trunk. And so the beliefs about yourself are those essential beliefs. Without a belief, a self-concept, you have no beliefs about anything else, because that's where it's branching off of. And so you're going to have those. You're going to be conceptualizing about things and about yourself. So I can still acknowledge that they're concepts because I can't know ultimate truth. But I can organize those concepts in such a way that they serve me very well. One of the metaphors that I like to use is, say you have a garage and it has every tool you could possibly need to fix anything in your home, but it's a mess. And so when you have something that breaks, you open that garage door and you look at all of the mess and you go, oh, forget it, because you'd have to go and sift through all the tools and try to find the right ones. Or you can organize that garage. You can know exactly where everything is at. And so when something breaks, you know exactly where to go to fix it and the right tools to fix it. That's kind of what self-concept is. It's about organizing your experiences in such a way that they serve you well, which means aligned with your values. You have anything you want to add to that, Jürgen?
Yeah, I mean, you could on the one hand say that thoughts themselves are an illusion, like they don't really exist. But I mean, the consequences of beliefs are real. I mean, they're real in their consequences. So
Mm-hmm.
the irony, like I remember one time, an older woman called me to do a session, and she said, like, what do you do really? And I used the word imagination, and she hung up on me because she said, imagination? I have real problems. Just hung up the phone. And in her mind, there was this stark dichotomy between imagination and real,
Mm-hmm.
which is a useful dichotomy to have, but not fully. Because I mean, look at, for example, time. I mean, time is a thought construct, right?
Mm-hmm.
We construct Mondays and Tuesdays and the work week. And is there a Monday in nature really? Like not really, right? So this is a complete illusion. But by creating that illusion and living in accordance with it has dramatic consequences. Like I remember I talked to some physicians and also a funeral home guy who was really enthusiastic about this, who said, Monday morning, more people die statistically than any other time of the week. And I remember thinking, like, crocodiles probably don't have a higher mortality rate on Monday mornings because they don't have Monday mornings.
Yeah.
And we don't either. But
Mm-hmm.
by living and kind of believing as if it is, it has real consequences in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, if there is no such thing as the future, it does not
Right,
exist.
right, right.
But if you don't plan for the future, you never, like, I love to travel. Without planning for the future, when I travel, you got to you got to buy the plane tickets, you got to, organize all that. So you could say, well, how could you plan anything if there is no future? It's like, well, we're intelligent beings who can do that. We can come up with these things, and it helps us. So, uh, you know, that's how we do that.
Yeah.
Let's see. Let's see. Blitzer 658 has a lot of comments. I'm gonna try to address your
Do you
question
get any more
directly.
specificity on the failure thing?
I'm making my way down there, so let's
Right,
see.
right, right. I mean, failure is one of those. It's an idea, right? It's a concept. One of the things about NLP I always found interesting is when people say, there's no such thing as failure, only feedback, and I'm like, well, in that case, there's no such thing as success either. Like it's a concept. It's an idea. It might be a useful way to frame experience or not, depending upon the context.
Yeah, I have something to say about that, and maybe we'll get to it, or maybe we're not. But
Yeah.
Blitzer 658 has the question: when I asked where does failure fit, I meant if you have a goal and you fail to achieve it, then what is the mechanism that caused this if there's no self at fault?
Yeah, so I mean, there's no self in there doing anything. Like the Buddha said back in the day, in the seeing there's just the seeing, and in the hearing there's the hearing, and in the thinking there's the thinking. There's no thinker or doer or seer or hearer separate from the experience. So I mean, life just emerges. But
And they go on to say, and what separates those who fail and those who succeed in a materialistic sense?
well, I mean, to the extent you want to even use the terms, I mean, we all kind of fail and we all succeed, right?
Mm,
It's I like Albert Ellis's emphasis on doing your best to like critically evaluate your performance without rating yourself. As in, you can say, I screwed up
mm.
or I succeeded without adding the I'm a success or I'm a screw up,
Right. I had
thing.
this conversation with actually Mark Andreas because in my book, which hasn't come out yet, but it should be this year.
I've
Forget
been, I've
what.
been reading it the last couple of days. I really
Oh, you
enjoyed it.
have?
Yeah, you should get it out there. It's
Wow,
good.
you have a. I think you have a much older version.
Recommend it. I think it's a year old. I completely forgot about it, and then in
I
preparation,
know. Okay, well, I should get you the more recent version because you're reading an older version. I think I have made a lot of changes
I
to
was
it.
I was pleasantly surprised by how personal you got and how
Oh
much you
yeah.
kind of shared. Because that I thought, oh, Damon might get very technical with this and very detailed. And I was like, this is a real story and a real. I really appreciated that. So that was
Thank you.
good.
Actually, my wife and my business partner had to talk me out of taking some personal stuff out. They were like, people don't need this much, Dave. So I have pulled some of it out. I don't know which version you have yet. But as it relates to the whole success thing, because I do a chapter on values and especially values to avoid. And Mark kind of took, like, hey, if you're going to put success as a value, then you're on that duality of success or failure, and failure is only supposed to be feedback. So what is success? And I said, well, success is only feedback. Success is a process, and failure is an integral part of that process. And if you think about it that way, then it becomes a different thing. And the way I used to think about it was like I either succeed or I fail, and that's not at all how I think about it now. It's an endless process of succeeding and failing. Failure is just part of the process, kind of like I guess the whole yin yang thing. So that's
I
the way
told
that
my I told my daughter yesterday. I said the biggest mistake is to not make the mistakes. Like just try to make some new and interesting ones.
But yeah,
Not
and
the
try not to
same
make the
ones
same
all the
ones.
time, right?
And if you do make the same ones, it means you didn't learn something, right? So
Right,
you
right,
have to
right,
learn something. Yeah.
right.
All right. Let's see if there's anything else. Okay, this is an interest from also Blitzer 658. I'm not sure how you're going to respond to this. I think metacognition is an absolute disease when you understand what Joergen is saying. What happens isn't a vegetative state, but a wu-wei state where you get the hell out of your own way. Okay, I think you're referring to when I said, well, if you didn't have thoughts and beliefs in it, you'd just be in a vegetative state. I mean, I think the question or the comment was for me. So, I mean, like I said before, it doesn't matter if you're the most enlightened sage. You're still going to have thoughts. You're still going to be conceptualizing. You're still going to have beliefs. You're going to have beliefs about yourself. You're going to have beliefs about the world. And I think it's great if you can see beyond the illusion of them. But we're still going to need to navigate the world and function in a world. Otherwise, you just kind of collapse and don't do anything. But healthy people just don't do that. We we feel our potential and we want to naturally fulfill that potential. And I want to do that in the most fulfilling way, and the way that I can be of most use to myself and to others. So that's my take on that. Do you have a response
Yeah,
to it?
I mean, if what he means by metacognition is just the ability to kind of be aware of your thinking, or even be able to reflect on your own thought processes a bit. I mean, it's not a disease in of itself, right? It depends on how you relate to it and how you use it. There's a fine line between reflection and rumination, and I mean, I often wish we could all have a bit more perspective on our own thoughts and not take them as seriously.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to do that without any metacognition. If everything that appears just looks like reality, it's not too much choice about it.
No. Let's see. It seems like some people were having discussions amongst themselves, so I'm kind of getting through that.
Yeah.
Skim through those.
So I think someone's calling me out on this one. What does it say that someone would desire the fun in seeing a poll of who won or didn't? When I called out and said if we could get a poll going. Well, first of all, I would say don't read into it too much. I do enjoy, and this was the other thing. I have challenged a lot of people to debate me live like this, and you're the only one who stepped up. And when I think about it now, it seems like that was the only way this was ever going to happen. You were always going to be the first person that actually came on, and we could have these challenging discussions, because we have these challenging discussions outside of this.
Yeah.
And I know you're pretty much fearless when it comes to these things. And you also do martial arts, which is what I do too. And whenever, I do jujitsu, you do like kickboxing, right? And
Yeah.
Thai,
Yeah.
yeah,
Muay Thai and
Muay
yeah.
Thai. And that does not surprise me at all, because you like to challenge yourself. You like to get into those situations where you're, jousting for position and in a physical way, and you do that with your ideas as well, and that's what we're doing, and we've always done that since we've met.
Yeah.
And I just think that's the healthiest thing. It can be unhealthy, of course, but I think it's a really healthy thing. And when you think about how Stoicism was created, it was created over hundreds of years of people doing exactly what we're doing right now. And that's how you galvanize these really good ideas. And other people are listening and watching, and that's part of it, right? Because we could just have this conversation, you and me, and no one would get the benefit of being able to take in this information. Yeah, and it's not really about who's right or wrong. And I don't really think of Joergen as being wrong, and I don't think of myself as being right. But it would just be interesting for the sake of interaction, what people think about it.
Especially these days, where it seems as if the climate in general is, that ability to disagree upon things, but you can still have a friendly relationship and
For sure, yeah.
explore things. That's a super valuable thing.
And that's one of the things that I think one of the reasons why we're friends. We do have strong opinions about our opinions, right? And but we can do this without it being something that turns into like, oh, I can't talk to you anymore. I can't be friends with you. Yeah,
Right.
that's just ridiculous. Let's see. I will read this from Blitzer, because this was before this comment, and I get this sometimes. I don't know how to take this when I get these comments on my YouTube videos where somebody ends the comment with "bruh." So, I don't know what to make of
It's
that.
more of a California thing.
Well, I doubt this person's from California. They said that they watch a lot of your videos, which doesn't mean they couldn't be from California. My sense was they were probably in Norway, or maybe Blitzer will tell us. But Blitzer says, the warrior versus the sage. Damon focusing on truth via practicality and debate. Joergen focusing on exploring the metagame and what's going really under they probably meant what's really going on under the hood. Both important. Okay, glad you acknowledge that it's both important. Still not sure what to make of your bruh. Blitzer says, Damon, read the comments, bruh. Okay, I read them. All right. Let's see. Tim says, not any tool will work for everyone. My experience with hypnosis has not been beneficial. EMDR is curious to me. I'm subscribed to NLP and the self-concept model, but I have run into barriers. Okay, fair enough. Let's see. Sweet baby Jesus, what a name.
Yep.
Developmentally, if you haven't got a strong sense of self, then trying to see through a false sense isn't useful, to put it mildly. That's a lot of truth in that, I think.
Yeah, it's probably something to that.
Yeah. And so here's the thing too, Jurgen, I would consider you someone who has a very strong self-concept. Like we were just talking about, like you have taken my feedback and never have taken it personally. You've always been open to it. And that's what we would call that sensitivity feedback. A lot of times people equate sensitivity with something that's weak, and that's not how we mean it in the self-concept model. But yeah, I think one of the reasons why you can come from the perspective that you do, seeing through the illusion of thought and belief and all that, is because you have a strong sense of self. It's not scary to you. It's not chaotic, or you think everything's going to collapse or someone's going to think something terrible of you. You're just able to do that. And I really do think that that comes from a strong sense of self. So, can you talk more about the non-duality? I think about Neo in the Matrix. That's interesting because at times when I bring up non-duality, there seems to be a lot of interest in it. I have done videos about it. I don't know if this is a subject to really get into here because it's not really NLP and it's not really what Joergen does, but actually it's kind of the backdrop of what we both do. One time I went to Steve and said, hey, like I'm having these kind of strange experiences as I'm working on my self-concept. I'm going into these sort of for lack of a better word, like these non-dual states where I'm starting to go like, who's working on what? And it was extremely meditative, and I felt like zero separation from anything. And Steve was like, yeah, I get those too. And he was a person who did not consider himself spiritual and really wanted to stay focused on the scientific. But if you're able to see through these illusions and there's no separation, like you were saying, I mean, that is non-duality. I don't know how else you would describe that. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, that's my experience. I don't really feel myself doing things as an agent. Most of my experience is flow. And, one interesting question I've often asked clients is, when do you feel the most like yourself or comfortable in your own skin or at home, however those points land? And when do you feel the least like yourself? Or you might say, that wasn't me, or that was out of character. And the kind of paradoxical thing about that is people usually refer to moments where the self-referential thinking was either absent or very low, like there's just the sunset, there's just the
Yeah.
dance, just life unfolding, there's just the conversation. Versus when people feel the least like themselves or out of character, that's when the story of Joergen or the story of Damon or Mark or whoever like is at its peak and intensity, and it looks really, really real.
Mm.
Which is kind of why I often say to clients that the difference between social anxiety and social comfort. Not saying that's the only factor, but is that the person who's comfortable has one conversation less. Like there's just a conversation,
Mm.
versus the other one is in their head having
Yeah.
additional conversations about the conversation, right?
Mm.
So
Yeah,
there
I
is.
debate myself all the time.
Yep. Yeah. I sometimes too. Like the I and the my keep each other company. Like I was called out the other day by my daughter. She said, "Who are you talking to?" Because sometimes I'll have this dialogue.
Mm.
Oh, there is that, and I can't believe I forgot that. And she was like, "Who are you talking to?" And I was just like, "It's just the me and the I."
She seems to be interested in who you talk to. You remember, you told me this when I got to your place. You were like, well, my daughter said, I told my daughter that you were coming here, that people were coming here to talk to me. And she was like, why would anybody want to talk to you?
Yeah,
I think she has your personality more than your son does, as far as I could tell when I was there. Maybe,
yeah,
they change,
I
kids
think
grow and
yeah,
change.
I think that's a safe bet.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
somebody asks, could the psychological illusion model be used for coaching? Could it help people achieve their life goals?
Well, I coach people, and many people find it useful, and a lot of people find that when rumination or worry or excessive thinking slows down, like there's less of that, then they spend more time in flow, and then they tend to enjoy things more and often do better as well.
Well, if you think about something like relieving anxiety, once the anxiety is gone, you have so much more energy and focus that you can give to something more important.
I think this is an interesting point that kind of ties to the non-duality thing. Is so I have, you know, I used to study with John Grinder quite a bit and the New Code NLP, and there was all this emphasis on like high performance states of like creating high performance states through these games and linking them to context. And again, not saying that that can't be useful or doesn't have its applications, but I think the non-dual folks are right in kind of pointing out that no, the flow, peace is naturally there,
Yeah.
and it's just that to use a typical non-dual analogy, like the clouds, there's so many of them, as in thoughts, that they seem to veil the clear blue sky, but the trick is seems the clear blue sky is always there. And that's kind of my experience too. Instead of trying to create a high performance state, I'm not saying that can't be useful on occasion, but when the extra overwhelm dies down, people tend to spend more time in flow and things naturally unfold.
Yeah, I guess that's where you start when you start learning NLP is really focusing on states, and I think it's not a bad place to start. But as I've progressed in my evolution with NLP, it's kind of like the last thing I think about. And especially with coaching clients, it's kind of like some preparation for your state. Prepared myself for 10 minutes or so before we got on here. It's like, yeah, I think that's important, but in the grand scheme of things, it's actually quite small. I think there's a lot bigger stuff. The stuff that we're talking about, I think, is a lot bigger and will take you a lot further. All right, so Fred says, I think it's time to integrate NLP with McGilchrist's work about the divided brain. Seems like Damon and Joergen come from either side and both hold some truth. Is that what you were talking about before with the experiments?
Well, he refers to them. He has this book called The Master and His Emissary, which is a great read, and he has a couple of new books too, the matter with things. But yeah, he's strong on that type of.
But hasn't that been debunked, like the left brain, right brain stuff, that it's not
Yeah,
really?
but that's not the arguments he's making though.
Oh, okay.
So he's very aware of that, and he's done research on that and stuff like that. But he has some very, I highly recommend anyone listening to pick up a copy of The Master and His Emissaries. It's a great read.
I'm so backed up on the things that I want to read. I keep buying books, and I'm like, I got to stack of them, and it's like, okay, I got to get to them. I try to because I travel, flying is when I catch up on my reading and my movies. Is kind of how I do it. All right, I think we're out of questions. So if you want more of Joergen, sign up for one of my programs, and you'll get the workshop for free next week that he'll be doing, and as well as the full training of a practitioner training based in Stephen Connie Ray Andreas' practitioner training that I created some years ago, and as well as a community and of people, all different levels. And then, of course, Joergen has his, is a 10-week training, you said?
Yep.
10-week
Once a
training?
week on Seeing Through the Self-Illusion. So you can
Okay.
just check out provocatehypnosis.com.
And also in the description, you'll find Joergen's channel, and you'll find the link to the video, the first video that we did together,
Yeah,
where
those were the days.
yeah, the good old days.
Those were the days.
That was a lot of fun. That was coming out
Great,
tomorrow.
great intro. I think you'll really love the intro. It's very well done. Very well done.
Thank you. Appreciate the compliment. Okay, well, let's sign off. We're going to close it out, but Joergen, you can hang in there where you are. But we're going to go ahead and close out the live. I think, Yulia, you can do that, right?
I'm doing it right now.
Okay.